Good evening. Welcome to Shemer Honors. I'm Chris Orkill.
And I'm Shauna James. Thank you for joining us tonight for another exciting Shemer Honors event. And tonight is special because it's our 6th anniversary.
This is always a special evening for us here at the Shemer when we can come together to honor an amazing artist. But then again, the Shemer Art Center has a long history of recognizing Arizona artists.
It does. In fact, the Shemer Art Center was donated to the city of Phoenix in 1984 by Martha Shemer, and its mission has always been to support and showcase Arizona artists.
Well, tonight we will have the opportunity to learn more about our 2021 Shemer Honors honoree and his 40-year career as a photographer, including his journey and a look at many of his works of art.
And I am so glad we are able to recognize this artist and his artwork and hold our Shemer Honors event, both virtually and in person this year. As you know, this year has been challenging for all businesses and especially the arts. At the Shemer Art Center, we were closed only for 2.5 months last year, but it feels like we have been trying to catch up ever since. Currently, we have a full schedule of adult classes and workshops, and in the evenings we offer art history lectures and wine and watercolor classes. For children and teens, we have summer camps and after-school art club, plus there is always group art exhibitions on display, including our current exhibition, Only Black and White, which was juried by Mary Meyer and features works created in black and white only in all mediums. But it is our 4 community events that often leave the biggest impression. And that is why we are glad that we are able to get together tonight, once again in person, to attend an event.
Absolutely. So let's get started. Tell us about Shemer Honors.
Okay. Shemer Honors was created in 2016 as a reflection of the Kennedy Honors Program. We decided each year the Shemer Art Center would select one Arizona artist to honor who has had a successful career, made an artistic and cultural impact, and given back to the state. Since 2016, we have had the privilege of highlighting 5 amazing artists who all represent these values. These artists include Angela Tusoni in 2016, Jim Wade in 2017, Meryl Mahaffey in 2018, Bill Nebaker in 2019, and Beth Ames Swartz in 2020. Tonight, we add our 6th name to this impressive list of artists who have achieved great success in their careers and made an impact through art in Arizona.
This year, we are pleased to introduce you to an artist who we believe is also an inspiration to other artists, especially those who are based in Arizona.
Our 2021 Shemer Honors honoree was selected by the Shemer Art Center as an artist who definitely exemplifies the values of this event. His 40-year career combines the early influence of his father and stereo photography with his own background in geology and his interest in the relationship between time and change. Early in his career, through the studies of composition, structure, physical properties, and history, he began to frame his own images and their stories. His work has taken him from scenic areas such as the Grand Canyon and Yosemite to areas of destruction from atomic bombs, earthquakes, and firestorms. And while a large portion of his work involves Arizona and the desert, he has also been called to capture images in many states from Washington, D.C. to the Arizona-Mexico border. The common denominator is almost always places where there has been some form of interaction between people and the land. Landscape photography is not just a picture, he says. It's a picture in time. You can always replace space, but you can never replicate time. We are excited that this artist will now add an exhibition to the Shemer Art Center to his impressive list of accomplishments, which includes authoring 18 books and having his work held in more than 80 museum collections worldwide. At this time, we are pleased to introduce you to our 2021 Shemer Honors honoree, Mark Klett.
Well, I grew up in New York State. My dad was an amateur photographer, and he liked to make stereo photographs. In those days, in the 1950s, stereo was very popular. He had a camera that had 2 lenses. He would make a picture, and then it had two sides, one for the left, one for the right. You'd take the picture in a transparency, put it into a viewer, and then you could see the scene in 3 dimensions. He photographed every holiday, every birthday, every event. Oftentimes we were sitting around the same table. We'd even have the same food because it might have been the same type of meal for a certain event. So he was kind of into photographing the family, into photographing over time, and making pictures on a repetitive basis. And this taught me a lot about photography and what the potential was of making pictures. Well, when I was in high school, I was making photographs for the yearbook as a hobby, but I knew that I needed to pick something to study when I was in college. And to be honest, I really couldn't think of anything that I wanted to do, but I did want to try to be outside. And I thought, well, geology might be a good solution to that. I can get out. I like looking at maps. I like being outside. I like hiking and looking at things. So I chose geology. I went to a university, that St. Lawrence University in northern New York, that had a very good geology program. So I just thought I'd give it a shot. So when I was in college, I still wanted to make pictures. And there were a group of us that ran what was called the University Photo Service. We made pictures for the yearbook and for the PR department. And we had a little darkroom, and we used to go down there and photograph in black and white and make prints. And if you worked for the photo service, you could use the facilities to make your own work too. So I did, and we didn't even have a class in photography, but it was a lot of fun learning from each other. By the time I graduated, I had to make a choice. I said, I'm either going to go in one direction or the other direction. And I just went in the direction where my heart was, which was to make photographs. When I graduated, I was also nominated to work for the U.S. Geological Survey as a field assistant and geologist. And that was how I made my money for the next 3 years. I worked for the USGS in Wyoming and Montana as a field geologist, and my job was to map coal. And I did that in very remote locations. And at that point, I learned a lot about what it was like to observe landscapes in detail, in great detail. Geology in some ways isn't an awful lot different than making photographs, in the sense that you're out there trying to discern what's interesting, what isn't, what's good information, what's not very useful information, how to take measurements, how to decide what's the best way to see something or understand something. And there's a parallel there. So in doing field geology, I actually set myself up for making landscape photographs. The other thing that geology made me very aware of was time. You can't look at a landscape as a geologist and not see process, layers upon layers of deep time. And it's something you're often not aware of. And when I began to make photographs, it occurred to me that photography is always about time. It always deals with either a moment in time or an extension of a moment. So it didn't occur to me for quite a while, actually, in my career, how interwoven photography and time is, and that eventually really became the subject of my work. In the late 1970s and early 80s, I was living in Idaho, Ketchum Sun Valley, working for a small art center. The money ran out, and I was ironically contacted by some people at ASU asking me if I'd be interested in a job that they had. And I said, well, I've never been to Arizona, but I need a job, so I guess I'll come down and check it out. I moved to Tempe in February of 1982, not knowing what I was getting into. And I first came to the campus, and I thought it was huge at that time. And I walked in, and I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. But I started working, and I thought, I'll give this place 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, I thought, well, it's not too bad, actually. And the people I'm working with, I really like them. It's an interesting place. I'll give it 6 months. And then after 6 months, well, it was a year. And then after a year, it went on. Well, here I am almost 40 years later, and I'm still in Tempe. One thing that was important to me, it's always been important to me, is that no matter what job that I have to make pictures. I have to be an artist. And that's sort of one of the first things that I always think about whenever I make a decision about where I'm going to live, what I'm going to do. I wasn't hired to be faculty at ASU originally. I was hired to be a printer technician. It was a classified staff position. But I took it upon myself, because this is what I love doing, I took it upon myself to make pictures every chance I could get. And on the weekends, I worked in the darkroom at night, off until midnight, went home, got up, was back there again at 8 in the morning. So I continued my practice. Over time, my job changed at ASU. I got converted to faculty in around 1992, I believe. Eventually, I rose to the level of Regents Professor, which is as high as you can get. So I think I may be the only person at ASU that's gone from classified staff to Regents Professor. But all the time that I've been at ASU, a big focus of mine has always been doing my work. It's always extremely important for me to continue projects, to discover things, to come across new ideas, and to push the work further. I tell my students that one of the challenges that they're going to face when they leave school is, first of all, they're going to lose a community that they have at school. And they're going to either have to find one or create one. The other thing is they're going to have to find a way to make their work. And if they don't do their work, they're ultimately going to lose touch with themselves and their practice. There's going to be a lot of challenges. They're going to have to find a way to make a living. They're likely to have a family. They're going to have many things pulling at them. Their job may not be the same thing as doing their art. But whatever they face, they're still going to have to maintain their practice if they want to be an artist and ultimately fulfill the thing that brought them to this thing to begin with. I also tell my students that art making is a process, and there are two parts of it. You think about the making of the art as one thing that you have to continue. You think about the career as paralleling the art, but it's not the same thing. The career is not the same thing as doing your art. In the end, you need both, but you have to understand the relationship between the two, and that relationship is constantly changing. It changes for a lot of reasons. It changes perhaps because your interests change. It changes because your life changes. The outside forces on your life change. So you need to be flexible. Sometimes things go quickly for artists. They might find success early on. I'd be wary of that, actually. Sometimes it takes people a long time. It also depends on how you define what success means. And that's something that every individual has to address for themselves. We all work in a community. We don't work in a vacuum. So those of us who have been around for a long time, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, now 40 years for me, and I hope to be into the 50 and 60 years, but who knows. I think we understand that what it takes to continue. And I just admire and, just want to give the the greatest respect to people who just maintain their practice over time. And I think we all must understand that about each other, that it's not about the success as much as it is the doing of the work that really matters. And we can respect that. I never thought much about what I wanted out of my career. I think the one thing that I did want was just to be respected for what I did. But I just assumed that the reason why you made pictures was that you wanted to show them. I came out of science, so I had no idea what I was getting into the art world. But at that time, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, photography was in a lot of ways really separate from the rest of the art world. I think there's been lots of changes in the last decades, and you now see photography being shown at every major museum. And it's often some of the most popular things that are being shown in the museums. So photography's had a great success becoming recognized as a contemporary art form, but I didn't think about that when I was starting out. I just thought about wanting to make pictures and have people see them. So there weren't as many choices then. There was some venues for photography, and I thought I would just pursue them. I wanted to do books, but books seemed impossible to do in that era, in the late 70s, early 80s, because they were few and far between and very expensive. But those were things that I sort of set my sights on. I wanted to exhibit the work, exhibit them in places that were starting to show photography as an art form, and also to publish books. Altogether, now I've done 18 books, either authored or co-authored. And the first book was called The Rephotographic Survey Project, Second View, The Rephotographic Survey Project. And it was a project that I began with some colleagues in the late 1970s to rephotograph historic pictures made in the 1860s and 70s of the American West. They were really the first photographs of the American West. And so part of my geology training kicked in, and I was thinking, what would it be like if we went back to where those pictures were taken from and take another picture from the same spot? What would it look like today, 100, 125, 130 years from that period? And that was my introduction to photography, photographic field work in landscape photography. And that took altogether 3 years to do the field work, another couple of years to do the book, So basically in 1984, that began my publishing career with that book. After the first book, other books came. They were pretty much all project driven, one idea after another. Some of them were what we would call monographs, which were just my pictures, based on, say, living in the desert for a period of time, wanting to make pictures about my experience. Some of them are collaborations with other people. I collaborated with other photographers, but also with writers, scientists, historians, and to create books on certain ideas and certain projects. And there's a kind of trajectory. If you look at the books, there's a sense of history in all of them. They all relate to either historic images or a historic story of some kind. And a response from the thinking about where we are today and where we were. That's a propelling kind of point for me in making the artwork. The most recent book that I've worked on is a 40-year retrospective called Seeing Time. It came out last year in the summer of 2020. And it's a combination of about 13 different projects. That's not all of them, but it's a large number of them. And it puts them together in an order which I think begins to make sense out of the work that I've done. When I work, I don't think about this logical sequence of one going to the next and to the next. I just think about ideas, and ideas tend to leapfrog from one thing to the next. Sometimes they jump around a little bit, but they tend to have a relationship. And I think that book begins to put them together. And working on it, I really began to see that more than anything, that my focus was not just on place, but on time and the relationship between those two things. I'm always working on several projects at once. And one of the projects is a series of saguaro photographs. I started them in the 1980s and I haven't stopped. So the new ones are in color. I'm working digitally now. So I can make really big prints of saguaros and they're just gorgeous in terms of the color and the detail and the quality. Or I can make little prints, and sometimes I'm making them small on the different types of substrates. I'm printing on like a Japanese tissue paper, which has a really beautiful character to it. I'm always thinking about the object of the print and how the print can translate the image into something that's really more than just a picture, but actually has a feeling of texture or quality or an objectness to it. I'm also working on three-dimensional objects. Starting probably in the late 80s, I paid attention to the stuff that was on the ground, not just what I was seeing in a distance. And I was fascinated by these things that I was finding. You know, if we find a pot shard that's 500 years old, we think, wow, this is the sign of an ancient civilization, people who aren't here anymore. What can we learn from this culture by looking at this pot shard? And I started thinking about, well, these things that people are discarding on the ground or leaving in the desert or using as targets, people are going to find them in 500 years. What are they going to think about us? So I started to make pictures of those. I started to collect them. And now I have a fairly sizable collection of objects. I'm starting to think about, how do I show them? Could I show them almost in an archaeological sense, like a future, thinking about the future? I'm working in the studio, just thinking about how to present these objects and how to make them understood by somebody as not just a piece of detritus, but actually has a bearing on culture and has social meaning. So I'm thinking about putting together an exhibition that would have objects, stereo photography, so you can see things in 3D, and still photographs. I'm sort of working on a little museum of the Southwest. People ask about my camera gear, and so I have two examples here. This is what I used to use for many, many years. This is the traditional 4x5 view camera built for field work. It folds up, nice neat little package. It's not too light. I used to use this. This is the Polaroid film holder, and this would go in the back of the camera. You put the Polaroid film in, take the picture, pull the film out and develop it so that if you see any pictures of mine that have edges around them that are black and white, they were probably made with a camera and film like this. Then digital happened and everything changed, but it took a while. Eventually, this is what I'm using today. This little camera does essentially the same thing that this does, except that instead of using film, it has a digital back. It's removable. This can go in a different camera. It has a little computer inside. It has a screen, and it has a big sensor. And this camera will make prints that I can make a 40 by 50 inch print or larger that looks phenomenal. It's actually more fine and sharper and higher quality than this. But there is one thing it does take, and that's batteries. It takes a lot of batteries. Didn't need that back in the old days. When people come to the studio, they always want to know, what are these? These are the sunrise sticks. It's a game that we play when we're camping in the desert, and this is how it works. In the night, I draw a circle that's about 6 feet in diameter. Then put the stick in the middle of the circle. The object is to guess where the first light of the sun is going to hit the stick and cast a shadow on the circle in the morning. So you put a marker on the circle where you think it's going to do that. So we call it the sunrise stick game. And when I first played this, I used to take any old stick, put it in the ground, then I would just toss it away. Later, I started to carve them on the campfire. So you'll see some of these are carved. This one, for example, out of a piece of ironwood, or this out of a root. Sometimes I would find things and I would use them and put them on the stick, like this is from a part from a downed airplane, an old can, different objects, things that I would find, bottle caps in this case. So they became markers of the journey, what it was like to be out there. And at this point, I probably have in the studio here over 300 of them over a 20-year period. Some of them actually make sound. This one I call the rattlesnake stick. More found objects from the desert. My little collection out here. Plastic knives melted in a campfire. This one is a bottle melted onto a rock in the campfire ring with a bottle cap on it. Interesting sculpture by itself. This one is an old paintbrush where the wildflowers have grown up through the bristles. Down here is a radio from a smuggler. When I first found it in the desert, it was still working, still active. A lot of my work is done in collaboration, and one of the collaborators that I've worked with consistently for now over 25 years is Byron Wolf, who was a student of mine in the mid-1990s and now runs the program at Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. This piece that you're seeing here on the wall is one of the pieces we did together. It's a little unusual because we didn't actually make the pictures. These are photographs, I think it's 50 sunsets on the Grand Canyon, and they came from social media. They were Creative Commons licenses where people were allowing other people to use their work. So we put them together in this form to create this kind of unusual piece about sunsets from social media on the Grand Canyon.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna.
I'm so excited to have your exhibition here at the Shemer, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions about it. I understand this is some pieces from your personal collection?
Yes, it is. The works in this exhibition are selected from several different projects, actually, and they've been done over a 40-year period, which is the length of time I've been in Arizona. And the works behind us are actually the earliest in the show. They're a series of saguaro cactus photographs. I've been photographing saguaro since the mid-1980s, and I still continue today. It's an ongoing series. These early pictures were done in black and white, and now the most recent ones are done in color. But I just love photographing them. I think they're emblematic of the Sonoran Desert, and one just can't help but relate to them, I think, as a human form. I wanted to point out one picture over here. This photograph of a saguaro, a young one, has my shadow cast on it. And it's kind of a reference to that idea that, in a sense, the saguaro represents who we are. We see them, we see ourselves in them. So this is kind of an entry point, I think, for me. These photographs are from a series of desert photographs I made along the southwestern part of the Arizona border on a place that's, these particular images from the Barry Goldwater bombing range. But historically, there was a route that went through this area called El Camino del Diablo, or the Road of the Desert. I published a book of this work sometime around 2014. And what it's meant to do is to refollow or retrace the the exploits and the travels of a man named Raphael Pompelli, who crossed Arizona in 1851 and wrote about this location. He wrote about the beauty, but also the dangers of this location. And in the book, I actually reproduced his text. And part of the message behind it was that in many respects, the borderlands haven't changed much since the 1850s. But it still is a place of great beauty, of constant militarization and observation and danger, not only to the climate, but in other respects too. So these photographs are part of a much larger series. I'd like to point out one photograph here, a detail in one picture called Bighorn Sheep Through a Border Fence Looking into Mexico. In this photograph, you're actually looking through a portion of the existing border fence into Mexico. And through the mesh, if you look carefully, you'll see a bighorn sheep walking down a rock. This was an incredibly lucky find. That sheep was looking at me from Mexico, and I was looking back at it through the fence into Mexico. I'd like to point out another picture in this room made on the Grand Canyon South Rim. It's a collaborative piece with my longtime collaborator, Byron Wolfe. In this composite, we're looking at a historic image of the painter Thomas Moran, who is sitting on the edge of the South Rim drawing a picture. Byron and I were able to locate exactly where that photograph was made, and then make another picture just to the left of it, which shows what Moran was looking at. At the moment that we were making that picture, a bird flew overhead. And it wasn't just an ordinary bird, it was a California condor. So I quick pulled out a small digital camera and made a picture of that bird flying overhead. And we were able to embed that into the image as well. You'll see that Moran has his hat sitting next to him, and we had Byron's hat sitting next to us in the corner of the frame. One of my favorite things to do is camp in the desert. And over a period of decades, I've made a lot of photographs of the places I've camped in, and this is an example of one of them. This photograph is from the east end of the Goldwater bombing range near a place called Hat Mountain. And I tend to photograph places that I have a particular one-on-one correspondence with, and this was one of them. In another picture in this room, I photographed the moon and an ocotillo. And this is just an example of one of these moments that happens when you're in the desert, where day or night, something happens, kind of a coincidence of timing, of lighting, of special prominence in experience. And so I tend to make pictures like that. They were originally published under a book called Revealing Territory in the early 1990s, and I'm still going at it today. These smaller prints are from a series called Time Studies. And in 2004, I received a fellowship from the Guggenheim Foundation, and I was interested in time as a subject. And I thought photography is really good at showing us things that happen really quickly in front of the camera. We can stop bullets with flashes and stuff. But photography is also really good at showing us things we can't see with our naked eye, things that take a long time to see, that it often goes unnoticed. So I created a series of small photographs that these particular prints, at least, focus on the sun and the moon. It's kind of celestial observations. So here we have, for example, two moons. In other prints, we have the sun and the moon appearing in the photographs. And these were done either by long exposures. I made exposures sometimes that took 2 days, and sometimes they were made with interval exposures. These are made using film. You can't do this with digital very easily. This is the kind of thing that photography can do, but isn't often used for. An exploration of how long is a moment in time. I can only say it's an honor to be honored. And it's always a surprise to me. But I think looking at the artists who've been honored by the Shemer Honors program, I'm very happy to be included and thankful. So thanks to Shemer and thanks to everyone involved for including me in this group of great people. And I hope that you can continue and bring others who are just as deserving and more so than I am.
As we close, we want to make sure everyone knows where you can look online to learn more about Mark Klett and all of the photography and other projects he has worked on over the years. And that is markklettphotography.com, as well as klettandwolf.com. He is also represented by Lisa Setti Gallery.
At the Shemer Art Center, we are looking forward to showcasing Mark's exhibition, which will be on display through January 6, 2022. We welcome everyone to view the extraordinary exhibition in person.
Thank you for your consideration and for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you. It has been our pleasure to introduce and share with you the achievements of Mark Klett, our 2021 Shemer Honors honoree.
From everyone at the Shemer Art Center, on behalf of the board, staff, and all our Shemer Honors honorees, thank you and good night.